your business and what you're working on, whether it's a nonprofit or you're in government, whatever it might be. Nothing that is being, there's no part of the industry, no person, no business, no entity is untouched by the pandemic we're going through right now. So we just wanted to give you a little insight in terms of what was going on out of our Washington, D.C. office. So with that, I'll just introduce some of the folks that are on today. You have former U.S. Senator Barbara Boxer from California, spent a number of years in the U.S. House and then terms in the United States Senate, was also a county elected official before that. U.S. former Senator David Vitter from Louisiana, former member of the House before that as well. Former Congressman Vin Weber from Minnesota will be talking, and then a number of staffers in different offices. Mark Braden, who worked in New Jersey for Governor Christie, but also ran U.S. Senate races in North Carolina and Tennessee, and now works out of our Nashville office. Ken Kaufman, who works in our Washington, D.C. office, former staffer on the Hill. John Eck, who helps run our Los Angeles operation, again, former longtime staffer in government and politics. Ben Feller, former White House correspondent for the Associated Press, as well as a number of major dailies in different states around the country. Mo Butler, former chief of staff to Cory Booker when he was mayor of Newark, and then again as a United States Senator. Stephen Aaron, again, another staffer, former staffer on the Hill and in our D.C. office. And Rodney Emery, who was also a chief of staff on the Hill and also worked for the Congressional Black Caucus as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to lead a little bit of a presentation as we go forward here, but first I'm going to turn it over to Mark Braden, who's this was his brainchild to do this. So Mark, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mike. I want to welcome everyone today. We've had RSVPs from over 300 individuals from over 30 states around the country. The purpose of today's call is pretty simple. We understand the only certainty facing you right now is uncertainty. And as elected officials hammer out what's next in DC on a plan or plans to stabilize our economy, we've already seen with the PPP rollout, it's not as easy as flipping a switch in DC to get much needed assistance to businesses and organizations across the country. As Mike said, I live here in Tennessee, but I work across 5 time zones, from Alaska to Alabama. Like many of you, my clients want to know what's going on in DC, decipher the signal from the noise, interface with members of Congress, the Trump administration, and his senior White House officials. My clients also need assistance in better articulating their internal business decisions to their employees, shareholders, and other external audiences. The purpose of this webinar and the Q&A that follows will go to help all of you better understand what's been passed in Congress, what's coming next in Congress, and how you can better position your organization as we start to return to normalcy in the near future. As we go through, there's a button, depending on what platform you're using, to ask Q&A. Go ahead and get your question in as we go through. We'll hope to get to as many as possible throughout the webinar. With that, it's my honor to introduce who I myself and many in our DC office look as a mentor, an example of how to navigate DC the right way and still deliver for their clients, and the most ardent Minnesota Golden Gopher fan in the firm. Congressman, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. We're praying that there is a Golden Gopher season this year. Anyway, welcome to everybody for joining. I am Vin Weber. I was a 12-year congressman from Minnesota. I'm particularly pleased to be joined, as you'll hear from in a few minutes, by 2 colleagues, also from the Congress, Senator Barbara Boxer, who I served with in the House of Representatives before she began her 24-year stint representing California United States Senate as a Democrat, and our friend Senator David Vitter, a Republican from Louisiana, who works mainly out of our Washington office as well as New Orleans these days. And then we're going to be joined. Mercury is a full-service public affairs firm. Government relations and lobbying are part of it, of course, but we also have a substantial communications capability, maybe even larger than our lobbying capability. You'll hear from one of the leaders in that area, Ben Feller, who covered the White House for the Associated Press before joining Mercury, covered education for the Associated Press before that, and many other things. Now it's Ben's task to get along with recovering politicians in the Mercury firm, so you'll enjoy hearing from Ben, as well as 2 of our top lobbyists in Washington, Stephen Aaron and Jen Kaufman. Stephen, a Republican, Jen, a Democrat. They really have an intricate knowledge of what's going on in DC and will be joining us for the Q&A session. I'm going to keep my remarks as brief as I can. Several weeks ago, there was a column in the Wall Street Journal by Ken Rogoff and Carmen Reinhart. Some of you may be familiar with them. Their careers have been spent as professional economists analyzing the history of financial crises, and they describe the one we are in now as, quote, unprecedented. When the people who make a living studying these things say there's never been anything like this, who are we to argue? David Vitter and Barbara Boxer and I have been talking about this, and in our long careers in Washington, we've dealt with 9/11, Katrina, SARS, Ebola, you name it, but none of us have ever seen anything like what we're seeing right now. And the response of Washington has been unlike anything we've ever seen before. The CARES bill, which we'll spend a lot of time talking about today, is over a $2 trillion in collection of money into the United States economy. We've never done anything like that before. We'll be talking a lot about your ability to access that and how that bill is working or not working, as well as the bills to come. We are confident there's going to be a bill number 4 and a bill number 5 probably. Can we tell you exactly when? No, the politics of this is a little more complicated than the politics that passed the CARES bill when the crisis seemed more imminent. But we are confident there will be additional bills which will create additional opportunities as well as additional complexities in dealing with Washington. That's what we're here to try to help you sort through today. And with that, I'll turn it back.
Thanks, Congressman. Appreciate that. Aaron, if you could put up the PowerPoint, we're going to go through a brief presentation just to walk through what has already been approved in Congress and what we think might be coming next. So Aaron, if you could just pull up that first slide. Thank you. Aaron, if you just kick to the first to slide number 2. All right, the overview of what passed, the CARES Act, in terms of what passed, the $2 trillion investment that was made by the Congress and signed by the President. As Congressman Weber said, there are big chunks in here, and I won't go through all of them, but obviously we are facing an unprecedented unemployment issue right now in the state. And during the 2008-2009 recession, we would see sometimes hundreds of thousands of people filing new unemployment claims in a week. It is now millions every week for the past 4 weeks. We're at 22 million unemployed. That's a staggering number. So that amount of money going into the unemployment insurance is also something that'll be looked at, I'm sure, in future. $150 billion for hospitals and providers, $377 billion in the small business rescue plan through the SBA. $500 billion at the Treasury Department, which is another way to assist certain businesses, different, which we'll go into. There's some money in there for airlines that were obviously hit very hard immediately. And then another of other pieces in there, including $150 billion to assist states, tribes, and local governments, which we'll talk more about later on, because that's also a place where we believe there's going to need to be a bit more. So that's a big overview of what happened there. The first piece here, which was very popular for the small and mid-sized businesses, the Paycheck Protection Program, that's been in the news a lot lately because it is so popular and going so fast. That was for small businesses under 500 could get up to $10 million, large amounts of it forgiven to cover their payroll and some operating expenses. It is already out of money, according to the SBA. That is going to be a source, an impetus potentially for a future move to get things going more quickly on a 2.1 version of CARES or whatever it might be to get the next stimulus going. Economic injury disaster loans. This existed before, but normally this would be in a location that maybe was hit by an earthquake or a hurricane or a tornado. This is now the entire country is essentially eligible for these economic injury disaster loans. They're much longer loans in terms of what the time to be paid back. You can see the interest rates there. Small business debt relief. If you already have an SBA loan, you may have received notice April 1st that you do not have to pay it for 6 months. That's part of what they put through. If you had a pre-existing SBA loan, there's going to be some level of forgiveness for a certain amount of time until the economy gets back on its feet. And finally, Treasury backstop, and this is for larger companies between 500 and 10,000 employees, where there is much more latitude from the Treasury Department and the Treasury Secretary in terms of how to credit the businesses. And while not exactly the same, it is similar to TARP and what happened in 2008 and 2009 in terms of the automotive industry, where the government will be looking for essentially some level of ownership for the taxpayers of the businesses until it's paid back. So there's more latitude there, but there's also far more onerous process and long-term process than the Paycheck Protection Program. Next, we're aid to the states, and you can see right there it was somewhat formulaic. There was $150 billion put into this. Even the smallest states would get a minimum of $1.25 billion. There's a certain formula to direct how much would go to certain states. So that was a population-driven formula, as you can see. But what that has left, it has left so a lot of questions for local governments, and there was a stipulation there about governments 500,000 and above. Obviously, in many of our states, we have large cities and small towns that are below 500,000. We have counties in many cases that are below 500,000. And so how is that going to work? So we're doing increasingly over the last weeks and months is working with municipalities and counties to make sure that they are thought of in the next stimulus package, and or that they figure out how to navigate with their state and county governments to make sure they're getting their fair share. And that's being spearheaded by Mo Butler and in our New Jersey office, and Rodney Emery in our Washington, D.C. office. So with that, maybe I'll turn it to Mo to talk a little bit big picture about that, and Rodney to get into some of the details about what the opportunities local governments have, not only now through stimulus, but also the long-term programs that have been there already. Mo?
All right, thanks, Mike. Mike, you had me take off my sweats today. I've been wearing sweats for 31 days straight and actually put on a shirt. It feels good. So my partner in crime, Rodney, will go into sort of the granular details around the work we've been doing with local communities. But we've been focused on local communities like a laser beam. You know, as you all know, mayors are on the front line of this pandemic. They are intimately dealing with the economic pain caused by the virus. I mean, you know, in conversations I've had with mayors throughout the country, you know, they're talking about lost revenue. They're talking about a massive spike in unemployment, small businesses shutting down, you know, public safety departments being decimated. I mean, you know, the list goes on and on and on. And through our conversations with mayors, you know, Rodney and I realized, as well as some others within the Mercury orbit, that Mercury is uniquely positioned to help these municipalities, irrespective of their size, to help navigate these uncharted waters. Not only do we have a best-in-class operation in DC, but we have unparalleled sort of access to state capitals and county administrations throughout the country. So whether you're a big city like New York City or Philadelphia, or you're a small town. We're doing some work with a small town in New Jersey, Bloomfield, about 60,000 people. We are well positioned to guide you through any level of government to meet whatever your objectives are during this unprecedented time. Rodney has been my partner in talking with local elected officials around what they can do with us to help navigate these waters. And so I'm going to turn it over to Rodney so that Rodney can sort of walk through the granular work that we've been doing with these local elected officials.
Mo, I appreciate it. Pleasure to be with everyone on the phone today. In a nutshell, as Mo shared, there are undercurrents that have been the result of the ongoing pandemic from a standpoint of local challenges being felt across the board with regards to delivery of services, as well as being supportive of constituents in need at this current time. We basically have approached a number of municipalities from a standpoint of really looking at two particular tracks. Obviously, attention is focused on the various stimulus packages. Mike highlighted earlier what the amount was within the third stimulus package. Vin mentioned the likelihood of future packages forthcoming. With that said, we're obviously trying to work with cities in navigating the pathway toward potential or current stimulus dollars that are in a variety of accounts. The other issue that we wish to point out to the folks that we're targeting and working with is that there is also an annual appropriations budget cycle that contains a number of grants in various federal agencies and departments that are aligned from a standpoint of being able to provide pots of money for cities that have ongoing challenges in their within their respective communities. These are grants that are contained or located within HUD, which has essentially the choice neighborhood grants as an example. When you look at the Commerce Department, you're talking about the EDA grants. When you're talking about complex engineering type projects, then you're talking about sort of the specialty that falls under the umbrella for the Army Corps of Engineers. In our outreach, as Mo had mentioned, the firm is uniquely positioned from a standpoint of having both folks on the ground with local relationships as well as being connected to the federal office in DC. That allows us to have sort of a two-layered approach. We can get firsthand intelligence from the ground and being able to contact and work with you in speed time, while also being in touch with us, the federal affairs team. We're comprised of bipartisan relationships, connected well with Senate Republican leadership, House Democratic leadership, as well as with the current administration. That has allowed us to do a number of outreach opportunities. Mo had mentioned within New Jersey, we've done outreach and are now working and providing services for this township of Bloomfield, the city of Newark. In Los Angeles, we've had a chance and are working with our colleagues, John Eck and Jorge Morales, where we're now in a position of representing Hawaiian Gardens, Huntington Park, and Montebello. So there are cities obviously in need, as Mike had mentioned, especially those that fall under the 500,000 number population-wise, that are sort of in the limbo with regards to how to make sense of the variety of pots of money that are around, but more importantly, moving forward, making sure that they have a voice at the table when it comes to designing future stimulus dollars. But I'll pass it back over to Mo, or pass it back over to Mike.
Great, thank you, Rodney. And I think for those on the phone or on the webinar with businesses, I think it's incredibly important to know too that what the states and municipalities are going through and what that may mean for future taxes, what that may mean for revenue in the states and municipalities. So just a ton to watch there. With that, I'm going to kick it over, Aaron, if you can kick the next slide, and ask Senator Vitter to speak about what's coming next and what we think may be coming next in the stimulus package.
Thank you, Mike. Again, I'm David Vitter. I represented Louisiana in the U.S. Senate as a Republican for 2 terms. And before that, I represented Southeast Louisiana in the U.S. House for 5.5 years. Great to be with all of you. So as has been noted, so far, Congress has passed and the president has signed 3 different bills directly related to this crisis. The third and most recent is the CARES Act that we have focused on. And we've focused on that because that is the most significant by far, particularly as it would affect all of you in terms of small business forgivable loans, et cetera. The question is, what's next? There will certainly be additional legislation passed, but it's very unclear when and what it will look like. About 10 days ago, the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell introduced a plan to quickly pass a very targeted bill, simply extending the Small Business Relief Program, which was expected to run out of money and which has run out of money in the last few days. In response to that, the Democrats objected to only passing that and demanded that other things be included in that bill. And their top 2 priorities are aid to hospitals and healthcare workers and additional help to state and local government. There's been a bit of a standoff since then over that disagreement about the scope of the next bill. And there doesn't seem to be any real break in that standoff, although discussions are continuing. Besides discussions between congressional Republicans and Democrats, particularly in the Senate, I think there's a separate discussion between Democrats and the administration represented by Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin. And so there's the same negotiation going on there, although certain conservative Republicans have already warned the administration, don't assume if you reach a deal that we will necessarily vote for it. So there's a lot of uncertainty about the next bill. I think it's fair to say that the next bill won't pass until at least early May. And it will probably have the major elements that I mentioned, namely extending the small business program, re-upping the small business program, and probably some additional aid to healthcare workers and state and local government. Would note one other thing, which has to do with process, which is significant. Yesterday, House Democrats unveiled a plan to allow a method of distance voting just for this crisis. That would have to pass by resolution, so most members will have to come back to Washington to pass it But if that happens and if it is passed, members would be allowed to stay at home and allow another member in DC to vote for them according to explicit instructions regarding each particular vote. So I just mentioned that as a significant development in terms of future legislative action. Mike, I turn it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Senator. There's a lot to unpack there, and I know we'll get to some more questions, more of that when we get into the questions. I'm going to turn over to Ben Feller next on communications, but one of the things I would challenge everyone who's watching this, and we challenge ourselves to this, is to think through what the world's going to look like when this is over. This is not like a snowstorm just hit and we hit pause, and 2 or 3 days later we'll all walk outside our houses and everything will be the same. This is going to be very different, and it's going to impact every single business, every single entity, every single nonprofit, every single government. This has far-reaching effects, and the people who are going to be the best are the ones who take a few minutes out of dealing with the current crisis to think about what it's going to look like after this crisis is over. This is a moment in time where the people who think the most and spend some time doing that will be positioned better come out of this, whether it's for their own employees, for their or within their industry, or as vis-a-vis competitors. And my experience to this part is not everyone is spending enough time to do that. There's still people who are thinking that this is going to be very similar to what it looked like before we went into this. I believe this is a moment that is a defining moment for this generation, like September 11th was for the previous generation. There is a before and there'll be an after. There'll be things that are done differently. Your downtown will have businesses that never come back. I don't know what it's going to mean for sporting events in the fall. Do 80,000 people want to stand in line and crowd into a sporting event? What's going to happen to movie theaters when this is over? There are different things. Our food festival is going to be the same. Do you want to eat out of a food truck right now, as we know it, I think is going to be different. It doesn't mean it's going to be dramatically different, but it's going to be different. But that is true for your business. What does it mean for your business, for your customers, for your constituents? And we have to think that through. Government is going to play a big role in that. Healthcare is going to play a big role in that. But every business is going to have something to do with this, and it can be positive or it can be negative if you're not thinking through. One of the things we've talked about greatly here is government relations and how much Washington and ultimately state capitals and municipal governments are going to impact what's next. But also the ability to communicate with your stakeholders, to communicate with customers, to communicate with constituents, anybody who matters to your business. How are you doing that right now? And with that, I want to turn over to, I think, one of the best in the business, and that's Ben Feller. Go ahead, Ben.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, everyone from New York City, and thank you for having us. You know, our job and our role, simply put, is to help you solve problems. And the reason we're going to spend a minute on communications, as Mike said, is because it can expressly help you solve your problems. If you're losing jobs and you're losing revenue and the people in your orbit are unnerved, then yes, knowing how to access the pots of money and navigate the government is really important. But the other part is knowing what to do with that information. Your success depends on how well you can make your case for that money, but also how well you're reaching out to your employees and your partners and your customers. It's a lot easier to be collaborative and to be supportive when times are good. It's sort of the part of the nature of how we work. It's a hell of a lot harder to communicate when times are hard. And in fact, communication often becomes optional. It becomes the last thing because you're just trying to navigate today. And it's easy to forget that so many people who count on you are navigating this as well, and you can help them do that. People are going to remember this period, as Mike said. They're going to remember who heard them, they're going to remember who listened to them, and they're going to remember who tried to connect with them. And so I would say to you that strong messaging is not a luxury, it's a priority, and it profoundly affects your success right now. We're in such a pattern right now, understandably, of receiving information like this and reacting, receiving and reacting. You can take this moment and not just react, but reset. That's how you get control back. People want to feel more in control right now. And your ability to get the information and then reframe it and start telling the story that you want to tell is going to put you in a great position. The way to do that, the key to power, is clarity, urgency, and transparency. That's how you're going to have credibility. That's how you're going to have the ability to break through. Be clear with people, have a sense of urgency, and be honest and be transparent. A lot of people are asking me right now, do we need a communications plan to do all these things? And I'd say a plan is good, but a story is even better, right? A plan can be sort of internal for your organization. What you need to do is have a story that focuses on 4 points: who you are, what you do, how it's different and why it matters. And you might be able to just get that down to one page or one paragraph, but you have to remember that you're in a deeply competitive environment and everybody else is trying to do the same thing. They're trying to influence lawmakers. They're trying to get into the next bill. They're trying to retain customers. They're trying to figure out their future. And so if you spend some time on those 4 questions and getting your story right, you'll be greatly advantaging yourself. And you have to remember that the facts never speak for themselves. You have to say the facts. You have to make people care. A lot of folks right now don't like the debate about who's an essential worker because they look at the organization and they say, I'm essential, we're essential. Why aren't they hearing us? Why don't they count us? And the reason is not that they disagree. They don't know, right? There's too many people out there who are in dire straits right now. So you have to give voice to it. And very quickly, here's 6 very specific ways that Mercury can help right now. It's in creating that concise messaging that differentiates you and doing it in a way where you're not using jargon and speaking to yourself, but you're compelling people to care. Internal communications that engages and builds trust is different than just sending out information. There's a difference in quality there. And critically, internal communications can help you for the rest of the year right now if done well. Shaping the best case for federal and state dollars. It's not just a matter of navigating the bureaucracy and filling out the forms. It's a matter of making an argument, particularly to the media. The media can help make a case for you and put you into trend stories, but you have to make an argument and earn your way into the story. We found repeatedly that when the press covers your city, your workers, your issues, your industry, it has an outsized effect on lawmakers and on regulators. They want to feel like they're responding to the need, and the media can give you that outside imprimatur to advance your story, and we can help with that. Obviously, we're all in a state of crisis. It's starting to feel a bit more normal, but we can help you move out of this period and be ready for any crisis that pops up. And then finally, as Mike said, be thinking about how you want to be known when this is over. It's a reset, and the time to start thinking about that is now. So with that, look forward to questions later and happy to turn it back.
Great, thanks, Ben. Real quick, I'll just, for those who aren't familiar, many of the people on this webinar are familiar with your state and where we are, and maybe have some familiarity with our DC office, but this is just our footprint, and so we wanted you to be aware of that. We have large operations in all the states that you see here and can help there. We're really, given many of us have a political background, as you see, we're really close to people in all 50 states, and it's not hard for us to connect, but here's where our offices are, and we just thought, should you have needs that arise in a state that is not the one you're most familiar with, you have some familiarity with where we are. With that, I'm going to, we're international too, so thanks for the reminder, Aaron. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron. You can probably kick this off the screen, and I'll turn it over to Senator Boxer from remarks before we go to Q&A. Senator?
Thank you, Mike, and we're going to take your questions. I just thought I could give 2 minutes of a view that is a little bit different. I think that David Vitter and I bring you that experience of having gone through so many crises when we were in Congress. And for me, having spent 34 years there, as soon as I got there, we had the AIDS crisis, which was a very lonely crisis because it was, as you know, in one particular community. And then, of course, 9/11 that galvanized the country, the Great Recession. I've seen every natural disaster known to humankind. I've gone through these things with 5 different presidents, 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats, and colleagues from both sides of the aisle that I really bonded with, and some that I didn't, of course. I guess the most important thing I could say is that this is a crisis like no other. And when you think about why, it is so deep. It is reaching into every single part of our country, into all of our families, one way or the other. It's so wide. And it's a global pandemic which is causing an economic standstill, which is so bizarre for us, just to hit the brakes that hard. It's never really happened before. So until we have a vaccine, that's the terrible news. The good news I can bring to this conversation as I close this is that I haven't seen this much agreement between the parties in Congress in terms of getting us through this. Yes, there's going to be debates around the edges, but both parties know that they need to act. Having said that, I want you to know it's still complicated and sometimes frustrating to navigate through these waters, even though everyone wants to help. And that's because there are so many power centers right now in Washington, and they're so diverse. You really have 4 power centers with very strong leaders, okay? You've got President Trump and his administration. You've got Speaker Pelosi of the House. You've got Senate Leader McConnell, and I would throw in, because of this 60-vote rule, Chuck Schumer into that. So it's important to note that these are not shrinking violets, and they are all trying to work together. And in order for us to be successful for our clients, we need a deep understanding of how they function, what they're thinking, and also a deep reach into these power centers to know where the decision-making lies. So in conclusion, you could choose to navigate these very rough waters on your own. I personally don't recommend it. And, you know, I didn't join Mercury for a way. I really saw the quality and expertise for the
Senator, I know we're going to go to Q&A here, but I'm actually going to kick off with the first question. And I'm going to ask Senator Boxer and Senator personalities at play. Obviously, Senator Boxer, you're close with Speaker Pelosi. Senator Vitter, you served with Senator McConnell. Councilor Weber, you know the House Republicans and Senate Republicans in the administration very well. I'm just curious, maybe Senator Boxer, you can go first in terms of how you see Speaker Pelosi and Senator McConnell and ultimately the White House all coming together, and whether or not there will be any kind of agreement on the next infrastructure, whatever the bill is, whether it's infrastructure and what that infrastructure might mean. Is it roads? Is it energy? What is it? I'm curious your thought on the personalities at play.
Well, we would need a long time to go through each personality, but but here's the compelling issue is the moment that we're facing, and I remember, and I'm sure David and Vin remember, in the Great Recession, as we watched hundreds of thousands of jobs just disappear every month. We've got that on steroids. So even though we have these strong personalities and we have these philosophical disagreements that go pretty deep, look, we've got them here among David and me and Vin and me and so on. That's got to be put aside. And so I'm optimistic that we're going to see more legislation, but I do think there's going to be a lot of give and take. And I think David said it well. He's predicting it's going to take a while, but it's all going to happen because no party is going to sit back and allow this to continue. This free fall, that's what it is.
I certainly agree with everything Barbara said. As she noted, the top 4 political personalities are very strong personalities, and 2 of them have very different visions than the other 2. However, the crisis is so great that it's in everyone's interest to come together, and that will happen. It just may take a while in certain circumstances. And quite frankly, the longer this goes on and the better we're doing, the more difficult it's going to be. Sort of ironic. If we get in a complete free fall, then people will come together more quickly. If we don't, more of the normal partisan wrangling will emerge. But certainly additional COVID-19 related legislation is going to pass. But as I said, in terms of the next bill, it's not going to be immediate.
I would only add to that, and I agree very much with David's timetable and with what Barbara said. And we think about it, okay, early May is when this next bill is likely to pass, as David said, and that's not immediate. Back off for a second. That's incredibly fast by congressional standards. What we're comparing it to is the speed with which the CARES bill went through, which was in response to the collapse of the stock market in March and early April. So Congress, Washington may seem like they're moving slowly and partisanship is asserting itself. Of course it is, but it's still moving in a very rapid and responsive manner compared to the past. And I think it's going to continue to do so as long as we're in this crisis.
Mark, you want to, if you've got vision on some questions, you want to throw some questions out?
Yeah, for sure. The first one, I know we have a lot of hospitality, tourism clients that we work for across, not just in DC, but across the country. I'll throw this out to the group. What do you see coming out of DC next with regards to relief for cruise industry or other tourism-related industries?
Anybody have any speculation on that? Stephen, Aaron, you have anything?
Yeah, the hospitality industry, particularly hotels, are in the process of looking for some very specific changes to SBA to open up the program to some of their owners. A lot of hotels are franchised, and because of some funky rules inside franchising, some of the bigger brands got left out. And so when the brand gets left out, it means all the smaller franchisees under them aren't applicable as well. So the hospitality industry is, as it relates to hotels, is looking for some changes to the program right now. Cruise lines, I only know how to tell the truth. They don't have a whole lot of sympathy in DC right now. Most of them are foreign owned. The way they wrote the bailout, or not the bailout, but the funding language around U.S. based corporations was written very specifically to keep the cruise lines from being able to apply for these grants and loans. In just the form of telling the truth, I don't really see that appetite changing in the next 2 weeks or 2 months or probably 2 years.
Let me just chime in with a few thoughts. I'm sitting in my home city of New Orleans, which is obviously very dependent on tourism, travel, large gatherings. I agree with everything Stephen said. I think the main framework of the small business SBA program and the larger business Treasury program is what will continue. If you're a business directly related to tourism and large gatherings, besides government help, I think you also need to be thinking about how you can adapt to what's going to be a very different landscape until there's a vaccine. And I don't think, again, I'm in the city of Jazz Fest, Mardi Gras. I don't think you're going to see any of that in the same way, big in-person conventions until there's a vaccine. And so businesses related to that part of the economy need to think through how best to adapt.
So Senator
I
Vitter,
tell my friends in New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania to just drive to the Jersey Shore. That's the best thing to do. Get in the car. Jen Kaufman, do you have any insight on any of the SBA pieces as they might be coming up next?
Not really on the SBA, although obviously there are a few carve-outs for some of the smaller hospitality and travel related industries that include them in SBA. And it's my understanding that members of Congress are working to broaden that definition when additional funding is added, either through guidance or through slight technical corrections in the bill. I do understand that U.S. Travel and many of the trade associations that represent these industries are talking quite frequently to both sides of the aisle. I understand they're probably asking for additional direct payments such that the airlines received, but I think, again, the appetite for including something like that will just depend on how likely Congress feels it will be to be able to move something like that, given everything that they're dealing with in terms of this proxy voting, whether or not they can actually bring members back. So I think that remains to be seen, but it is certainly an issue that everyone is hearing about from industry and is grappling with as they craft additional legislation.
Thanks, Jen. Mark, you have another question?
Yeah, I'm condensing a few questions that we've gotten regarding municipalities, especially smaller ones. One is from the mayor of Columbia, Tennessee. Around 45,000 people down here. They just canceled Mule Day. If we're talking about tourism, come on down to Mule Day. But Rodney and Mo especially, what can small towns, especially those under 50 or around that population size, have to be getting in future stimulus bills? Are the funds competitive, automatic? And are there any, these are main street type communities with town squares that thrive on the local community. So anything to say to these small towns and municipalities and what's coming next?
Yeah, good question, Mark. First and foremost, League of Cities and the U.S. Conference of Mayors are actually reaching out to the respective leadership in the House and Senate with regards to the 500,000 population threshold. That in itself is problematic because smaller cities basically cannot directly access dollars that have been set aside for the expenses that have been accrued as a result of the pandemic. So obviously they feel, as they should, that they're sort of left out. I think it was sort of in a rush that drafters sort of reached this 500,000 threshold. And I think obviously smaller cities around the country are reaching out saying, hey, we're sort of left out of being able to directly access these funds. The problem is we have to go through our counties, and our counties are not necessarily required or have any guidance as to how those funds are to be distributed. So it's on a case-by-case basis how those funds will be distributed county by county. And that's under the assumption that the counties meet the 500,000 population threshold. You actually have some instances, we're actually representing the city of Montgomery, Alabama, where Montgomery County is less than 500,000. So you can imagine that's a double conundrum with regards to them now having to go to the governor to access those funds. The question goes directly to the point that Senator Boxer had mentioned. Working with a team like Mercury that has the relationships can actually help you from a standpoint of a couple of reasons. One, working with your congressional delegation in the House and Senate, effectively carrying that narrative to the negotiators in the House and Senate, the appropriators, and other key members who are shaping these future stimulus packages. I am confident that the messaging by the U.S. Conference of Mayors and the League of Cities is getting to the members of Congress, sharing with them the problem that this 500,000 population threshold has created. But as I mentioned earlier, folks need to also realize there are existing dollars within agencies and grants on a separate track that are created and maintained through the annual appropriations budget cycle. So there are really two parallel paths where dollars can be pursued, but certainly working with your congressional delegation, working with your trade associations, articulating the concerns that you're experiencing as a city of that size. But more importantly, if you have the resources, being able to work with a team like Mercury to actually have your single voice defined within the debate. But I'll be happy to ask others to chime in if they have a view.
Rodney, John Heck here. I was just going to say that the way we can be helpful as well, because of the CDBG funding that came out, it went through the counties. The county of Los Angeles, for example, is holding 20% of that funds before they give it to the cities, and that's causing a little bit of strife. So I think what we offer is boots on the ground in DC and then boots on the ground locally to help make that a better deal for municipalities.
If I could just jump in, Mike, for a second. I think one of the reasons Nancy Pelosi is holding up this SBA agreement is I think she's hearing from cities and hearing from people like Mercury who represent a lot of the cities that this is not a good situation to have, the state take off something off the top, the counties take something off the top, and the cities are left with nothing, and they are, the closest to what's going on. So I would love to ask Jen, if she's there, if she's heard that this is something that Nancy is dealing with, trying to add these funds directly to cities, because she has mentioned cities, counties, and states. I just was curious what Jen has from the Democratic side, if Jen's there.
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you, Senator. I haven't heard specifically in terms of, I know her staff are meeting regularly with Secretary Mnuchin, and I don't know, the details of those negotiations, but it is very clear. I'm sure most of you saw that when the SBA fund was drawing down relatively quickly, the House Democrats put out a list of, I think, 5 or 6 priorities that they were insistent on being included in a plus up to the SBA funds. That has narrowed down significantly to now I think Pelosi's top sticking points are, of course, SBA funding, because I think that's undeniably a priority for both parties, but also she has hung her hat on making sure that state, local, municipal city governments get the money that they need because they're on the front lines. And I don't see her moving off of that. I think that's that and money to healthcare workers and healthcare providers on the front line are the two things that I think are holding up this process, because she won't give up the opportunity to move this, knowing that Republicans in the Senate and the House want to fund SBA, as does she. But I think her fear is that if she gives up on that now, it'll take too long to get those funds to states and municipalities. And so, you know, that, in my opinion, is one of the main reasons that we haven't seen an agreement yet.
I would just add one thing. The leading proposal to lower the threshold of cities from 500,000 to lower it so that they can directly access federal funds is to lower it to 50,000. So, for instance, the mayor in Tennessee of a city of 45,000 would still be under that. So there would, if that were the new law, there would still be a need to deal with either the county or the state. And we at Mercury, I think, are very good at dealing on the federal level, but also at the state and local level with counties and states for clients like that.
Good point.
Thank you all. The next question, kind of a two-parter, I guess. A lot of folks ask about higher ed. I know, Ben, you do a lot of work on helping higher education institutions think through how to talk about themselves. Question that came in is, what are some strategies for higher ed and kind of the outlook for higher ed, in this environment moving forward?
Yeah, well, we spoke earlier in the call about the need to take this moment to really figure out how you want to be on the other side of it. And while that might sound intuitive, it's hard to do that with so much focus on the day-to-day. Higher education is one of the best examples where that's imperative. There's a growing, sort of creeping realization that campuses might not be open in the fall. You're talking about an enormous impact on those students and their families and the communities that really depend on them for the economy to work. And while that's not a given, it depends on what the health professionals say. Campuses that are going to succeed are thinking now about two things, really. One is financially how to stay afloat using remote learning and figuring out how to count on that even with reduced tuition. And then secondly, from a messaging standpoint, what can you be doing right now to send the signal to parents and students who are going through the admissions process that you do want to be open, you do plan to be open, and you're thinking about ways from social distancing to the way you're looking at the higher ed campus community to make it safe for them, because it's in this window right now of April and May where colleges are going to have to decide, what are they doing to prepare to be open? And the ones I think that are successful, ones that we're working with, are grappling with that question right now. Again, it's the difference between reacting to what the Secretary of Education and what the governors say, and being proactive in sending out signals to your boards and your potential students. And that messaging can be really tricky because you have to balance the public health with the need to be appealing and alluring to families. And that's something that, the higher education has its own distinctive flavor and politics. And we work with a lot of universities and are helping them navigate that right now.
If I can add a quick point as a higher ed customer, I happen to be home with my family right now, one member of whom is a high school senior who's been accepted to 5 universities. And his decision date is pretty much May 1st. And it's very evident to him and to my wife and I how proactive and impressive or not these different universities are about painting a picture of what this fall will look and feel like.
Great insight. The next question, again, trying to condense a few that are coming through on the chat. And again, if you have any questions, we've got a time for a few more. It seems like every week is infrastructure week. So does anybody have any insight on infrastructure in future legislation moving down the line, future packages?
Well, I could attempt that. David and I just went on Bloomberg News to talk about this, and we're both very strong supporters of doing this. My view, and I don't speak for David, I'm interested to hear what he thinks. You know, I do think David is right that we're not even going to see a fix to all of this till early May. And I just don't see infrastructure in that fix. It's going to go beyond that. And I think as we see these unemployment claims, millions of them coming in, it's going to put more and more pressure on both sides of the aisle. People have different views of infrastructure. Trump loves it. He's wanted to do something for a long time. As everybody knows, the gas tax funding is going down. It's terrible. So there has to be a way to just put it onto the budget. And this is the moment they seem to be doing that. So I am very optimistic on an infrastructure budget, but I don't think it's immediate. But I think the time is right now for anyone on the line that is either in the construction business or a city or a county to look at what projects are planned and shovel ready, because I cannot imagine that we're not going to go there. We have to create jobs, and infrastructure creates jobs. It creates them through the private sector, and they're good paying jobs. They're prevailing wage jobs, and people are going to be clamoring for jobs. So it's going to happen. I don't see it immediate. I see it, you know, down the road, but it's going to happen.
I agree with everything Barbara said. I don't think it's going to move immediately, but I would say of non-COVID-19 specific issues, it would be first in line and could happen perhaps late summer, early fall. Ironically, again, it may depend on how good or badly we're doing. The chances of an infrastructure bill probably go up if we're doing particularly poorly as an economy. If we're doing okay, I think normal political tensions and rivalries, particularly right in front of a national election, creep in and make passing an infrastructure bill more difficult.
The only thing I would add to that, and I agree in basis, except David, I would say look at how fast we spent the SBA money in the CARES bill. Like 2 weeks, just out the door, gone. We're talking about now another $250 billion in bill number 4. And when we were discussing before this call about how soon that'll be spent, there's a high likelihood that'll go out the door almost immediately. Compared to that, infrastructure is long-term and slow. And we wouldn't normally think of it that way, but in an ironical way, the worse the crisis is in the short run, the more pressure there is to put dollars behind things that will see an immediate impact. Not over months, but over days.
But I would just say, you're right on the point, but as we all know, the mood of the people and how they feel about the future is dependent upon what they see coming down the road. And if they know, but they know we have almost 50,000 bridges that are structurally deficient. 50% of our roads are in bad repair. We've got lead in water, et cetera, et cetera. People don't have broadband. And David and I discussed that quite deeply on the radio. On Bloomberg. So the bottom line is that I think it would be a confidence builder, but you're right, infrastructure is going to be a 10-year bill, but it will start with shovel ready. I think, getting back to David's point, which is really right on target, all of it depends on how we're doing. If we are still seeing jobs falling out, this would be the place, because I know, for example, Trump loves it, Nancy loves it, McConnell is dicey on it, but he worked with us on the last highway bill, so he likes it, but he's nervous about the deficit, which I think you alluded to, Ben.
I would just say, I know we've got maybe time for 1 or 2 more questions. Aaron, if you wouldn't mind, just because before we wrap up at 2, do you mind putting up on the screen the emails from Mark and my email, just in case people have questions they didn't get to or need anything? You've got Mark and my emails there. Maybe you can leave that up just leave that up for 1 minute while Mark, you can take the next question.
Yeah, and to that point, Mike, we have a lot of questions that are more technical questions regarding SBA loans and PPP that we'll respond to. We'll follow up with if we don't get to it here. I'm sitting here in Nashville, Tennessee. We like to think of ourselves as Music City, USA, but we're actually Healthcare City, USA. And the next stimulus package or packages, how's healthcare going to be affected? What's the next steps regarding healthcare, not just long-term, but also stabilizing frontline workers as well?
This is Mike. I'll take the first piece of that, and I don't know what's going to happen, but I know where there's going to be some pressure points. Maybe counterintuitively, there have been when the unemployment numbers have come out, healthcare has been very hard hit because so many elective procedures have been sidelined. Healthcare has been particularly hard hit. You can see that in the unemployment numbers. The other thing is, in the first tranche of money that went out to hospitals, Aaron, you could probably take that slide off now. The first amount of money that went out to hospitals went out based on national formulas without really regard to where the hotspots are. And I think you're going to see pressure coming from places where there are hotspots. I'm in one in northern New Jersey. I think northern New Jersey, New York, other places like that, New Orleans certainly, now you're seeing it in many other parts of the country, are going to be asking, rightly so, for some consideration to be given to the costs that they've borne, to the number of patients they've had as well based on that. But that's just one piece of it. There are so many parts of the healthcare infrastructure that have been taxed heavily on this. That's one piece I think that's going to have to be addressed, but I throw it open to others on the rest of it.
I'm happy to add a bit there. I think there was a understandably urgent need to address hospitals specifically, but I think there are a lot of community health centers and other health providers on the front lines that require, direct payments, easy access to low interest loans and grants that have either been excluded because of their size or affiliations under SBA and may not qualify under Treasury. So I think that there will be an effort to bring in as many health entities that are dealing specifically with COVID, and as Mike Duhame said, an emphasis on hotspots, but as he also said, focusing on other medical practitioners that, because of COVID have had to shutter their doors, but still provide a very valuable service to our communities. And then something that the Democrats have been talking about, and I'm not sure how far it will go, is something called a Heroes Fund, which I'm not totally clear on, but I believe it provides, almost hazard pay for healthcare workers on the front line so that we can continue to have doctors and nurses, showing up to work, taking care of our communities, and being compensated for that accordingly, since they're having to, isolate themselves from their families and putting themselves at risk every day.
All right, with that, we're at the top of the hour, and I want to thank my colleagues who joined this. I want to thank well over 200 people who joined this. So thank you so much for joining. If there are any questions, you can email directly to Mark or I or whoever you were invited to this by. So we appreciate your time. Thanks so much for having us. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.